Fairly
0.
skilled.
Okay. Fairly skilled.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And Sandy?
Trying.
Fairly skilled.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
All right. So we have a mixture. Okay. So I was a professional baker for about 7 years. I owned a brick and mortar bakery in East Cobb. And I did out of my house for about 4 years. And then I had the actual bakery for about 3 years. And fortuitously, I sold it right before COVID, sold the bakery. And then when COVID hit, she didn't make it. So kind of good that I got out when I did. Anyway, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I just took this one out. I'm going to make another one. But I just took this one out and I only have 1 tube pan. So I'm going to make the other one in a bundt pan. And I wanted to go ahead and do this one so that I can glaze it and flip it and everything. So I can help you guys with that, but I'm going to let this one cool. I like to use, you can use a toothpick but they're so short. I like to make sure I get all the way down there. So this is just like a metal skewer or any kind of skewer to make sure it was done. And it definitely came out, so it should be fine. So I'm going to set this aside on a cooling rack and let it cool for a little bit. We don't want it to fully cool, so we wouldn't want to let it sit for an hour or two or something like that and let it cool. We want it to be still slightly warm to kind of ease it out. I'm going to set it over here. We'll deal with that later. So.
Hailey, at times I've seen the bakers stick a thermometer in a cake. Is that a way of testing? And I would have no idea what temperature you were looking for.
Yeah, I wouldn't know either, honestly. I think that method of tried and true toothpick works perfectly well. The only time it might not work is with brownies. Because brownies, you don't want it to be cooked all the way through. You want them to still be kind of soft in the middle. Mm-hmm. And if they're too, once they cool, then they get crunchy. Maybe you like them that way. But if you want them kind of like doughy and moist in the middle, you have to make sure that, that toothpick is still wet. So but for cakes, that still works pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and just start prepping my apples here. I have 6, I think, but these are pretty big apples. So you could get away with 5 or even 4, depending on how big your apples are. So I'm going to go ahead and start breaking these down. Now you can use different kind of apples.
That was the next question.
Yeah. So if most people, when they're making like an apple pie, use Granny Smith, because it's a really firm apple and it doesn't get so mushy. Also, it gives some balance to the sweetness. But this is Honeycrisp. The one I made over there are Fuji. So, and then I made one last week, which was Granny Smith. So use what kind of apples you like. I don't recommend like a Golden Delicious or Red Delicious, anything that's really soft. Like that's too soft. But use what kind of apples you like. Don't feel like, oh, I have to use Granny Smith if you don't like Granny Smith apples.
I tend to like the really tart ones, like Macintosh or.
As long as it's kind of got some firmness to it, it should be fine. Don't feel, these are huge apples, so I might even just do 4. I did 5 for that past one, and it seemed okay. So maybe we'll do 5. So somebody had asked me if we were going to go ahead and prep the apples beforehand, and they turn brown and get kind of yucky. So I decided we'll just do it now. It doesn't take that long. So basically a Jewish apple cake is parve. It has no dairy in it. So this is an oil-based cake. And have you guys made cakes with oil before and butter, I'm sure?
Yeah.
I use canola oil a lot.
Yeah, I usually use canola oil as well. That's what I'm gonna use today. A lot of people, you know, sometimes they turn their nose up like, oh, it's an oil-based cake. Well, actually, oil-based cakes are usually moister. So like my chocolate cake is oil-based, and it is definitely a much more moist cake. It's much softer as well. My vanilla cake is butter, and it's really just a taste thing when it comes down to that. It's a little bit more dense, but you know, butter tastes good.
But it also has more saturated fats, so the canola is a little healthier choice.
That's true. That's true. So depending on your recipe, you know, you might have either or. Like when we were doing cakes that needed to be pretty structured, if we were going to carve them or anything, we would use like a vanilla base, not a chocolate or red velvet or something that was super soft, because it was just too soft. And if we had to, if somebody really wanted it to be chocolate, I would have to switch recipes and use like something that was butter based. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and chop these up. They don't have to be super, super tiny, but you don't want them huge as well. And it just can kind of be like a rough chop. You don't need anything that looks super pretty. Nobody's going to see the cut in there. And I'm going to go over some different types of ingredients that I use, that I like, as we kind of go through this. So you guys all getting ready for the high holidays?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi.
Well, the chorus is
early
trying
this
to
year.
work this out.
Kind of feels weird that it's so early, especially when it's like so hot outside.
Yeah.
So I had all the ingredients today, this morning, and then I'm like, I don't have apples. Everything else, and I was like, that might be important. So I ran out and got the 2 different kinds. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna try 2 different ones and see.
Good thing we live around the corner from a Publix, because we'll start on a recipe and find one thing missing.
Story of my life, but usually it's Home Depot. It's like a project, and then it's like, oh my gosh, we forgot this. You have to go 75 times. My husband's downstairs. He's we just redid, well, we're redoing our basement, and we redid his office, and he's finishing the door on the new closet we put in his office. And if you hear any sawing or anything, that would be why. So I gathered all my ingredients. I don't know if you can see, they're all back there. And mise en place, which means everything in its place, is French. It's usually what bakers and chefs do to get all their stuff already measured out and ready to go. So this is really the only thing I have to prep. It's the apple, so it'll take a minute, but the rest of it will go pretty easy and fast. there is going to be a couple of things that I will show you. And, you know, if you've done a lot of baking, you probably know this, but honestly, there has been many people that I have talked to and I will tell them certain things and they'll be like, I never knew that. And I'm like, okay, you're how old? I have a friend who loves to bring dessert. Most of my friends don't bring dessert when they come to my house because they're afraid to. We have one friend that he likes to bake and he's a single guy and he'll bring his whatever over, but it's not usually very good.
Oh.
And one day I was just saying something casually about something baking wise, and he was like, "Oh,
Uh-oh.
maybe that's why."
Oh, good.
Like, yeah.
Let's keep this, and she said you could use 4 if they're pretty big. These are pretty big. Just cut.
So this is the last one. You could use an apple core and all that fancy stuff. I just personally easy enough to do it this way.
Wayne and I are eating. Yeah. We could use to make an apple pie. Could use Granny Smith apples. Make the pie more tart.
Mhm.
That sounds good. I didn't know that.
Last half. Okay. So now I'm going to mix these apples with sugar and cinnamon. The recipe, I'll talk about the recipe in a second, but the recipe calls for like 1.5 to 2. I like cinnamon, so I'm gonna do 2. 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And I'm gonna use tongs actually, because it's gonna be a little bit easier to toss these. And I'm just gonna put 2 teaspoons of the cinnamon and then 5 tablespoons of sugar.
It's okay. Everybody else is too. That's. I'll do it. Thank you.
And then I'm just gonna toss it with the tongs here. Get them nice and covered.
Your recipe says 5 cups plus 5 tablespoons of sugar. It's just the 5 tablespoons going in now?
It should be 2 cups of sugar plus 5 tablespoons.
Oh, okay.
That says 5 cups. That is wrong.
I'm gonna fix that right now.
So make sure you change that. It should be 2 cups. Thank you for bringing that.
Did you say 2 cups or
It should say 2 cups and 5 tablespoons.
2 and 5
That makes a lot more sense.
That is a lot of sugar. Yes,
Well-
we do not want that. Okay. I'm glad you brought that up. So let me go this way. All right, so our apples are prepped. And now we're gonna go ahead and move on to our dry and wet ingredients. So actually, I'm gonna start off with flours. The only thing I don't have measured right now is flour. And that's just because I wanted to show you proper measuring. So I like to use unbleached all-purpose flour. The brand doesn't really matter that much. Some people say it does. I mean, I like the King Arthur, or, you know, I mean, whatever. If you want to use Walmart flour, it's fine. There are certain ingredients that I'm very picky about. Flour is not one of them. I'm sure some people will say that's blasphemy, but it is what it is. But I do like the unbleached flour. So proper measuring of your dry ingredients. One of them is use a dry measuring cup. Okay. This is one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, that there is wet and there are dry measuring cups. It is super important that your wet goes in this and that your dry goes in here, and not to interchange them.
I just made Bill come to listen to that because
That's-
this argument
Tells
all
me
the
that all the time. I still don't understand.
Yeah, that's especially with baking, that is super important because it is very, you need to be precise. It is a science. And when we worked at the bakery, everything was measured out. So we weighed it because, this is not the best way of measuring, but it works fine for this. And most recipes are in cups. And but it is important that you put your wet in your wet measuring and your dry in your dry. So
thank you.
yes, no problem. So I like to just scoop it like a big scoop, and then anything flat, like a butter knife, whatever, don't pack it down. Just make sure that you go straight across the top like that. And we need 2 and 3 cups of flour. So I like to keep my ingredients in a big tub like this, so it makes it easy to just scoop it out. Definitely no packing down for this. As far as sifting goes, the recipe probably says to sift. I am not a big sifter. I will sift powdered sugar because it sometimes gets clumpy, but I'm not a big flour sifter. I baked thousands of cakes and we did hundreds of pounds of batter a week. And if we sat there all day sifting, we would never get anything done. So I was not going to pay somebody to sift things. So we don't sift. You guys can sift if you want. I'm not sifting. All right, so we have our flour. And I'm going to dry this a little bit, just a little water in here. All right. And then we need our baking powder and salt. So for baking powder, if you can get, let's see if you can see that there. If you can get the one that's aluminum free, I prefer it, just like aluminum free deodorant. I recommend it. Sometimes baking powder can give you a little metallic-y taste in your food. It's just better for you. So this is the Rumford reduced sodium aluminum free baking powder. It's one I recommend.
There's none in the recipe that I printed out. How much do you use?
Okay. That is 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of baking powder. I'll resend that recipe out to you, but that's
Thank
what you
you. Okay. I just
One
write it
tea-
in.
Yep, 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of baking powder.
Salt's in there, but not the baking powder. Now it is. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I am going to go ahead and just use a whisk to mix this up real nice and well. You want your salt and your baking powder to combine with your flour really nicely. This recipe, you don't need like, a mixer or anything like that, which is nice. But we do want to make sure everything's combined well. All right, so got that. And I'm gonna go ahead and do our wet ingredients here. Now, we're not gonna put eggs in quite yet. So we're gonna put our sugar. So the sugar should be 2 cups of granulated sugar. And then we need our vegetable oil. So 1 cup vegetable oil. Quarter cup of orange juice. Doesn't give it really too much flavor. Just kind of gives it a nice subtle. And then vanilla extract is one of the ingredients I'm super picky on. So it is 2.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract. I use 3 because I have a really good vanilla. But I cannot, and I have not found any decent vanilla anywhere in Atlanta. I've been to farmers markets, I've been to Costco, I've been to grocery stores. I have been anywhere, even the ones that they say are super fancy and everything, I don't like them. So
Where do you get the good stuff?
I order mine. I order mine in a gallon.
Wow.
size. So I order, and I only use Mexican vanilla. I have a gallon in my pantry now of dark and a gallon of the clear.
I had no
That's
idea there was such a thing as Mexican vanilla.
So for the high holiday boxes, we are sending everybody a little bit of vanilla in
Ooh.
them. And it is the Mexican vanilla that came out of these gallons that I'm ordering. So do a test. Take whatever vanilla you have in your pantry, take the one that we send you in the box and smell them. You will see the difference. They, it is a huge, most vanilla that you can purchase has a ton of alcohol in it. And it just smells alcohol-y. I can taste it when I make, especially frosting and things like that. It was one of my more expensive ingredients to purchase, but it was worth the money. So yes, you will be getting that. So mix it up real nice till it's all combined.
Oh, Mexican vanilla.
Yeah, the other ingredient I'm super, super picky on is cocoa powder. So like I can't, no disrespect to Hershey's or anything like that, but I have to use like the Belgian expensive cocoa powder.
Where do you find Dutch processed cocoa? So many recipes call for it. I haven't seen it anywhere.
So I actually buy mine at a restaurant supply. So I have a big giant bag of cocoa powder. If you are interested, next time I go and get one, I will buy you one. They're like $22 or something for a big bag.
Huh.
And it makes all the difference in the world, especially chocolate frosting, your chocolate cake. It'll be amazing. So yes, I spend more money on cocoa powder and vanilla than anything else. And butter, but I'm not as picky on the brand of butter. So, all right, so we've got that going on. Now we want to combine. So we're gonna put our wet into our dry. So we get everything in there. And when you're most recipes, it's better to have your ingredients at room temperature unless it specifically says, like, obviously, if you're making, some kind of dough, that's like a, like a pastry, maybe even cookies, some kind of thing like that. You might, your butter might need to be super cold, but a lot of times you want your ingredients at room temperature. So we're gonna go ahead and combine those, and then we're gonna add the eggs. And we're just gonna do them, I'm gonna try to do them one at a time. Eggs, once they get room temperature, get kind of mushy. But we're gonna go ahead and add those. We just wanna make sure they're really nice and combined. When you are putting things in your mixer, it's really easy to overmix. And that can change the consistency.
I'm really lazy and I use my KitchenAid mixer constantly.
I do too. I use it for a lot of things. I right now have 3 KitchenAid mixers in the garage that are dead because I put the motor out in those 3. And then I have 2 more inside. So I can tell you I use it a lot. But you do have to be careful that you're not overmixing.
Mine is about 30 some years old, but I did have to replace a circuit board in it at one point, but
Oh yeah.
knock on wood, it's still going.
My husband is my handyman, and he's replaced all kinds of parts. That's why 3 are sitting there right now, because I want him to fix them. We just haven't had time. I'm like, yes, I'm the only one who has 5 KitchenAid mixers at their house. So we got all our eggs. Mine real well here. Once you put them in, your batter is thick, but it's much more manageable. Just want to make sure you scrape down the sides real well. So like I said, I have used my Angel Food pan, tube pan for my other one. So I'm going to use this one in a bunch. I have not made it in a bunch, but we're going to test it. So I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm not making it for anybody but myself, so it doesn't really matter. You are welcome to flour and grease your pans with Crisco, butter, whatever you want. I personally like Baker's Joy. Super easy.
That is a great product. I have not had a bundt cake stick since I found out about that.
Yeah, it is the greatest. At the restaurant supply, you can buy big bottles of them, and I would buy a case of them pretty much every week, because this is amazing stuff and it works really well. So we're going to test it out in this font. All right, so it's pretty well covered there. All right, so I like to do about a cup of batter. And put a cup at the bottom. And it doesn't have to be beautiful or even. It just kind of wiggle it in there. Use my knife. This is because my bunt's kind of small. It's going to put a lot at the bottom, but you don't have to put as much, but about a cup is good. Then you want to take your apples. And this is why these tongs are really good. So when baking, there are some things that you can substitute, like you can, you know, if you wanted to use something other than orange juice, if you wanted to use another liquid, you could probably switch that out, just as long as you kept the measurements the same. Even alcohol, you could probably do that. You don't want to really mess with your flour, your baking soda, your baking powder. You know, your salt you can vary that a little bit. But you really want to stick to your recipe. Vanilla, I use a little bit more vanilla here and there because I like my vanilla. Spices, you know, if you wanted to add some nutmeg or whatever, you can definitely do that kind of thing. But for the most part, you have to be careful when switching out things, just because when you read the reviews of cakes and things like that, people will be like, well, I changed this, and this, and it wasn't very good. So I don't know. Like, well, if you switched half the recipe and it didn't come out well, that might be on you, and you should not be reviewing it. If you're going to review it, try it the way it was, then change things. So I put in maybe about 3 tongs full of apples, then I do another cup of batter.
So you're sort of alternating the layers, huh?
Yeah, so I'm
Ah.
alternating them. You kind of want to smack it down a little bit. That. Then we're going to do it again where we put more apples on top of that batter. Now, like, there's only cinnamon in the apples. So if you, let's say you just love cinnamon, you could put cinnamon into the batter. Things like that. You can change a little bit. Okay, so I kind of covered up the batter again with the apples. And then I'm going to get another cup. The most important thing is that you start with batter and you finish with batter.
Mm.
So you don't want apples to be the last thing that you put on the top, because then they'll just be falling all over the place. And you can, you know, if it's a little high on one side, you can kind of like mush it around. But all right, so I'm probably going to do my last thing of apples in here. So there's a lot of juice at the bottom of this. It's fine to let some of that juice go in there. You don't have to like pour it all in there, but it's fine if some of that does go in there.
I guess when I first read it, I thought this was like a pineapple upside down cake, but layering it sounds a lot better.
Yes, yeah, it's not all in one thing. All right. So then all the batter I have left, I'm gonna go ahead and put that in there.
So would you guess that pan you're using is the size of a regular bundt pan, or is it smaller?
This one's a little smaller. You could put it really in any size that you want. I wouldn't go like a 10-inch, 9-inch is probably fine. Probably no smaller or bigger than that. But it's just gonna make it thicker or you know, taller versus thinner. The other one's gonna be much thinner than this because it is in that 2-pan.
I think my pan is shorter and bigger, but it's probably going to hold about the same amount. So that's good.
Right, yeah. So I just kind of make sure it doesn't have to cover all the apples, but just kind of, so it's even on top. So it's not really, you know, like super tall on one side and short on the other. All right, so you can see it's pretty even.
Mhm.
You can always like wiggle it around just to make sure all that batter and stuff is in there. And smack it on the counter a couple of times if you want. I do recommend, especially for those 2 pans, is to put a sheet, a cookie sheet underneath it. I already have one here. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in. And timer. So the last one I did, I put an hour and a half. It took about an hour and 20 minutes. So I would start testing it, depending on the, you know, your oven, at about an hour and 15. And then just kind of check on it. You can see if it's super wet still at an hour and 15, it's probably gonna be at least the, you know, the full time. If it's getting, you know, a little bit firmer, then you probably are good to go ahead and, you know, check it at 120. You don't want to over bake it, but obviously you don't want it under baked as well. So you're just going to kind of feel that out. So I'm
Using a convection oven?
Mine is convection, but it's not on convection. So it's just straight 350. All right, so let me go ahead and share my space here. And then we will work on the one that's done. So I was saying earlier, and I don't know if I said this to everyone, is that Sandy was saying that a lot of times things will drip through her pan at the bottom since it clasps at the bottom and you have that ring. and I was saying that you can use saran wrap to wrap the bottom of your pan. You can use that when you also do cheesecake. Saran wrap can go into the oven. It's perfectly fine. It will not melt. So you can use it for that. All right. So we're gonna do a simple glaze. Actually, let me grab one of these bowls here.
Behind.
Well, I'm behind, but.
All right, so
There it is.
you can make a glaze with any liquid, really. You can use water. You could use apple juice. You could use orange juice. I mean, whatever you're feeling, you can do that. So let me see. If you want to do it with that, I mean, it's just powdered sugar. This one is 1 1/4 cup. I'm going to do an orange juice glaze, but if you want to do apple juice, go for it. This is 3 tablespoons of orange juice. And you can do 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. I mean, you could do a little bit more. Again, like I said, I like my vanilla, so I use a little bit more. But if you have a super alcohol-y one, then I would probably stick with 1/4 teaspoon. And if your powdered sugar is really lumpy, then I would suggest sifting that. Powdered sugar tends to, when it sits, it just kind of, I mean, when we bought it, we buy it in 50-pound bags. And sometimes there would be like softball rocks of powdered sugar that were just unmanageable. Do this with a whisk, but my whisk is dirty right now and I'm like cleaning it. So I'm just doing it with a fork. You just want to make sure it's really nice and combined.
And did I hear you say you put it on when the cake is still warm?
That depends on what, I said to flip your cake when it's still a little bit warm. But most of the time you're going to glaze it when it's cool.
Okay.
But there might be times where you want it to kind of absorb into it. You know, like if you really wanted it to be the flavor and you don't necessarily want it to be the decoration on top, then you could do it while it's still warm. You could even poke holes in it and it'll soak in there. A lot of times if you're doing like a rum cake, things like that, like that's when you're gonna want that to be soaked in. For this, it's probably best when it's a little bit cooler, but I'm just, because we don't have all the time in the world, we're just gonna kind of do this. Hang on one second, let me get the cake again. So like I said, it took about 1 hour and 20 minutes. I've kind of messed around with it a little bit, just kind of ran a butter knife around the side of it. It is a spring form pan, so and it's, I mean, it's cool enough that I can pick it up, but it's still pretty warm. So I'm gonna kind of cut some of the top just a little bit so that little overhang here, so when I open it, it doesn't just pull apart. And then gently kind of get the ring. Because mine has like a little hat on top, I'm gonna,
Ooh, pretty.
muffin top, I'm gonna fill it out to the bottom. So this is where I was saying that you could wrap this bottom part with saran wrap if you have leakage problems. Just also make sure it's put on correctly, because a lot of times you think it's on and it's kind of wonky. All right. So that's what it looks like. You can kind of see all the apples and the layers of cake and everything in there.
Looks delicious.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. All right, and I don't need like a whole 2 cakes, so I'm gonna, what I'm gonna do with one of them is I'm gonna put it in my freezer. I'll talk about freezing here in a minute. And then when I have some occasion, I'm gonna use it for bread pudding. I'm gonna make it into a bread pudding.
Oh, wow. I bet that would be delicious.
Yeah, so, because I don't need all this. But so freezing is one thing I want to talk about. Some people think, oh my gosh, you should never freeze anything. It's going to make it taste bad, blah, blah, blah. And I had a friend who, when she got married, she went to every baker in town asking them if they were going to freeze her cake before they decorated it. And, you know, almost every baker said, yes, we're going to freeze it. And then she said, oh no, I can't do that. I have to have it not first. Freezing cakes and pastries and all these kinds of things is actually very good for it. When we baked cakes at the bakery, we would let them cool, wrap them in saran wrap, and put them in the oven. Sometimes, I mean, in the freezer. Sometimes we would put them when they were still slightly warm into the freezer. It locks in all that moisture, and it makes it much easier to decorate, much easier to frost a cake that is frozen than one that's all crumbly. So I freeze everything. It's all about the wrapping, right? So as long as you wrap it right and your freezer doesn't have some weird smelly fish in it, it will be perfectly fine to freeze. And I recommend it. So anybody who says, don't freeze, blah, 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 then you can come have them talk to me. Because it's actually a really good thing for your cake. So when I did, like, let's say this was a 3-tier cake, I would freeze all my different layers, and then I would take them right out of the freezer and ice them, ice the whole cake, and then let it thaw.
That is brilliant. Oh, I never would have thought of doing that.
Yeah. So,
Unfortunately, folks on British Baking Show didn't have time to do that on those days when they're trying to bake in 95-degree weather, but it sure would.
yeah, that's why you see them trying to get them into the chillers, because they want to get it cool enough. But yeah, it makes a big difference. So usually what we would do at the bakery is on Monday, we would bake all our layers. We would make all of them and freeze them. And then it usually spilled over into Tuesday and so on and so forth. And then we would decorate on Friday, and they would be ready for like Saturday. So that's how we did it, but we froze everything. All right. So I've got it out of here. We're going to see. I'm going to flip it over on to my thing here. Let's see if it's cool enough. Come on, baby. All right.
Beautiful.
All right. So you can see that. I think that's pretty good. Still pretty warm. So I'm gonna do the glaze, even though I would not normally do it this warm, because it's just gonna slide right off. But since we're not gonna sit here all day, I'll do it. Let's see. I'm gonna attempt to put this on here while it's warm too. I'm living life on the danger side here.
Oh, wow. I would have landed that on the floor for sure.
All right. So I set it on my cake pan. All right. So we've got our glaze. And there's, I mean, you could literally just take it and, you do this with your fork or a spoon, however you want to do it. I'm going to show you, just for learning's sake, how to work it's amazing how many people don't know how to use a piping bag. And so I'm going to show you that just as a bonus feature. So I have a piping bag. I think this is a 12-inch. And then I have a coupler. Couplers have 2 parts. They have this part right here that goes in the bag, and then they have a ring. And you'll be surprised how many people will try to put this with the ring into the bag. There are two different parts. Please remove ring from coupler, okay? Then you have whatever size tip you want, right? So this is a 3, it's just a little circle at the end. If you're not used to filling a piping bag, it's good to use a cup. And you want it to make a cup like that. And you're going to put the big part of the coupler down into your bag. Push it all the way down. And if you can, I don't know if you can see, but it has ridges, and then it has like a straight, smooth part right there. I just take the scissors and I kind of run it around that edge right there between the smooth. And then I just pull that part off. So you know exactly where it needs to go. We're back down into it.
Mhm.
And then you put the piping tip on there, and then you put the ring, the coupler on back onto the coupler. Make sure it's nice and tight. So that's what a piping bag looks like. And if you have it in your cup, you don't have an extra hand, you can just pour your glaze in there if you want to. Again, you can just do this with a fork or a spoon or whatever. You don't have to do this with a piping bag. I just wanted to show you all that. Proper way of holding piping bag is that, one, you want to seal it real well. You want to kind of like twist it. Whatever hand's your dominant hand, you put it between your forefinger, your thumb right here. That's where it lives. Okay. Always like that. No matter what you're doing, that's where it goes. You use this hand to use pressure. And then if you need to, you can always use your other hand. But really this other hand, like mine would be my left hand, is my guiding hand. So like if I was gonna write happy birthday on this, I would push with this one and I would guide with this one to help me. Also, if you are a shaker, right? Most people shake a little bit, ground yourself. Put your elbow down like this, or even just anywhere. If you can put it on something, then you won't shake as much. So like I could write happy birthday on here.
What a great tip. I would never have thought of that. I've not been very skilled at using one of those.
Yeah, they take some getting used to, but once you use them, I mean, I use them for everything, deviled eggs, anything. So again, you'll see how I just make sure I keep it twisted. That's really important. And then I can just go back and forth. And because it's still warm, it's just going to kind of blend in with the cake. But if the cake is cool, it'll be a difference on the top, but it's still going to be delicious either way. And because it is warm, it's going to absorb and give it a little bit more of that orange flavor in the actual cake.
Beautiful.
Voila. You have your, I'm not going to put the top on it right now because it's still too warm. It needs to cool down. Questions. What questions do you have for me?
You wouldn't put the icing on before you froze it though, right? You'd freeze it, and then when you took it out, then you do the confectioner's thing.
So if I was making a cake and I was going to ice a cake, I would definitely freeze it. If I was doing a glaze and not frosting the cake, like this, I would, so let's say that I made this apple cake and I want to use it next Sunday. I can freeze it, right? Once it's cool, I'm going to wrap it, I'm going to freeze it, put it in my freezer. I'm going to take it out probably on Saturday, because I'm probably going to use it, noon on Sunday. So I'm going to take it out Saturday. I'm going to let it come to room temperature. Then I'm going to glaze it and I'll stick it in the refrigerator until Sunday. That's what I would do. I wouldn't try glazing it frozen. It's just going to come right off. But if you were frosting it, like if you have frosting, then I freeze it and frost it. So
How do you wrap it? I've never quite gotten how to wrap baked goods in the freezer. I put things in plastic bags, but you can't do that with a cake, really.
So I just take a piece of saran wrap. I'll put it this way, cut a piece, then I'll take a piece this way. And then I flip the cake right in the middle of it and then, and just make sure it's covered real well. Now, if I was freezing it for a long period of time, so like if I was doing a wedding cake and the top tier, they want to save it for a year and eat it, then it's a little bit more complicated because you want to make sure that it's really well sealed. You would use saran wrap plus like aluminum foil, plus you put it in a box, plus you wrap the box. Like it should be really well kept. But if I'm going to use this in the next week or two, just putting it in saran wrap, like I said, as long as you don't have anything really smelly in your freezer, it should be fine. If you get a whole bunch of fish in there, maybe not, but.
Usually I'm freezing muffins or cookies or something down there.
Yeah, also I use, hang on, I'll show you.
Okay.
I have about, I don't know, 1 million of these. And I use these to freeze all my cupcakes, my cookies. I don't wrap them. I just put them in here and I freeze this whole tub.
That's a good tip. Thank you.
I mean, I probably at one time had hundreds of these, but I still have about 30 in my cabinet.
I'd hate to know how many are in my cabinet, but yeah, lots.
But I like that big size because it'll fit a dozen cupcakes and it'll fit cookies or whatever else in there. So yeah, I use that. But for cakes, I freeze them individual layers in saran wrap and just make sure they're on a flat shelf. Like don't store them on top of your fish because then they're gonna be all lumpy and stuff. Also, if you do like most of the time, your cake is not going to be perfectly, straight. It might have a little dip lump or whatever. But if you frost your cake while it's frozen, you can manipulate it and make it look nice and smooth and beautiful, even if you don't have the ugliest layer of cake, trust me. With frosting, you can fix anything.
As opposed to trying to saw something off and make it flat, huh?
Yeah, we really didn't do much cutting of cakes. Most of the cakes, we just made them look pretty with frosting. Yeah, and a level. We use a level. And, if it's a little bit, just kind of push it down and frost it and use a level. So.
For an ordinary cake, not a wedding cake or a really fancy one, what kind of frosting do you think is best?
I'm a big fan of buttercream, just American style buttercream. I mean, Americans tend to like things sweeter. So when we have clients that were international, they would want, Italian buttercream or, Swiss buttercream, something like that, because they have more butter, less sugar. But the consistency is different and it's nice. So it's good for like wedding cakes and things. But for normal stuff, I just use a buttercream, all butter, never shortening. Yeah, we used all butter. We bought, we used probably close to 70 pounds of butter a week. We went through.
Holy cats.
Yeah. So it's an expensive thing. Butter is not cheap. So, but it's, for me, like it made all the difference in the world not to put shortening and things. And that wasn't an option. So good quality ingredients. Like I said, my vanilla, cocoa, and it has to be butter.
I was wondering if that cake art store sells smaller quantities of the good vanilla. Would you have any idea? That one on Lawrenceville Highway? Have you ever?
I haven't been to that one. I have not found, like literally I have tried finding decent vanilla and I have not found any place that sells it. Even if it says like it's Madagascar, vanilla bean, blah, 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 it's still not good. Even I used to take, there was a a Costco one that I bought that it says, you know, it's fancy, blah, blah, blah. And I used to use it to paint on cakes because you need a high alcohol content to use paints. And so I would use some of that vanilla because it has such a high alcohol content to use it for painting. And then when I would teach classes, I would have people smell the Costco fancy one versus the Mexican vanilla. And people are just like, how do I even, like, you know, I'd have like third graders that would be like, I'm not using any of that, Mom. You got to find something else now. I make people into cake snobs.
Well, I can detect fake vanilla, you know, in micro amounts. I can't stand that artificial vanilla, and that's what the grocery stores seem to be full of.
Yeah, like I said, I cannot find it. So I can't even find it at the restaurant supply place. I have to order mine. So I ordered 6 gallons for the high holidays, and we're going to put them in small jars and get them out in all the boxes. So you'll be able to smell and taste the real stuff.
Oof.
I was going to look in the King Arthur catalog and see what theirs is now, because their products are usually so good, but I haven't looked for vanilla there.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't tried theirs. But yeah, it's an important one, especially, I mean, you maybe aren't going to taste it as much inside your cake, but for frosting, like it'll make all the difference in the world for frosting. I can taste a fake vanilla a mile away. Yeah, it's not good. I mean, so any other questions?
Thank you for your patience with all my questions. I feel like I've monopolized the time.
No. I'm glad that you asked questions. And hopefully I gave you some tips and stuff that will help you.
Definitely.
And please send me any pictures of any of yours that you finish. I'd love to see them.
I'm going to make this and I'll send you a picture.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or, anything if you have any other questions. I'm going to fix that recipe. So, because I know a couple of things are messed up on it. And just so you know, this is not my recipe. So I don't have a recipe for this. So I just got one offline and then I tested it. And, making a recipe from scratch is virtually impossible. Like, it's very difficult to make a recipe from scratch. The best thing to do is to try a recipe the way they make it and then tweak it. Like I was saying, like there's certain things that you can tweak and kind of make it your own. Yeah, so I'll make sure this recipe is correct and I will resend it to you.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been
You're
great.
welcome.
Absolutely great.
Yes, thank you. It was great. And I can't wait to do it.
Oh, good. Awesome. Well, enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Okay,
Thank
you
you.
too.
All
Bye.
right. No
Bye.
problem. Bye.